Hello and welcome to this special lecture on augmenting humans, from physiological signals towards digitalized emotion. My name is Kai Kunze. I'm professor at Keio Media Design, Keio University, Yokohama. Before jumping right into the topic, let me give you a brief overview about the lecture today. I will first introduce the goals of the lecture, so what are the takeaways, and also a little bit about my background. And then we'll start with the related fields of augmented humans. Augmented humans, a new research area that originated from human-computer interaction. And we look first into ubiquitous computing, wearable computing, and pervasive computing. They are, for me, a little bit interchangeable. And especially into an enabling technology called physical activity recognition or activity recognition in general. We'll move over to cognitive activities and cognitive states. And then we will be discussing augmented humans, the definition, what kind of research is produced in that field. And to illustrate this, I highlight 3 examples of our research. One is dealing with programmable vision, programmable perception using sensor-driven eyewear. Another one is dealing with augmenting a dance performance or augmenting a social gathering using interpersonal synchrony. This is Boiling Mind. And last but not least, we will look into how it's possible to detect and also augment a peculiar, a very specific feeling, and that's musical frisson, that's aesthetic chills when listening to music in a classical concert scenario. And finally, I'll give the conclusion and a little bit of an outlook. So before we start, you might wonder about my background. This is actually not just an animation. This is live data from sensors that I'm wearing. So I'm wearing these sensors. So this is an electrodermal activity sensor. This is kind of a sweat sensor. Puts a small current and it measures the conductivity of my skin. And if I'm sweating, kind of that gets lighter, and sweat indicates usually stress or excitement. And the other sensor, this is a blood volume pulse measurement. So this gives you information about my heart, and this is the red ball that is expanding and shrinking based on my heart rate, and the green line is the electrodermal activity. I'll later on also show some data from smart glasses, but we'll get to that later. So here in big, so you see right now also my data streamed from this sensor. So if there are a lot of peaks, like right now happen a couple of them, that means that I'm nervous or excited. So kind of right now teaching you about sensors and physiology. And so you can follow this also then behind me while I give the lecture. So then getting back to the lecture at hand, I should also mention, so this is our own design. So this is built by our lab, and it can be used for these visualizations, and I'll be going into detail a little bit later about the sensors, so don't worry about that, and also what we can also do with this type of sensor and wristband setup. Then what are the goals for this lecture? So, as mentioned, I want to introduce to you this exciting field of augmented humans. It's part of human-computer interaction. It comes out of work in ubiquitous computing, wearable computing, and pervasive computing. So I will introduce these terms and give you a bit of background about what are enabling technologies for that. We will be focusing especially on activity recognition, and then moving on also to cognitive states and cognitive activity recognition with everyday sensors with unobtrusive sensing. And then we define augmented humans and go into several specific examples. One is the programmable vision using sensor-driven eyewear. The other one is the recording and also augmenting of interpersonal synchrony in a dance performance. And the last example again deals with a specific emotion, detecting and also augmenting frisson, these aesthetic chills while listening to music. So as a takeaway, you should get a broad overview over Ubicom, wearable, pervasive computing. You should know what activity recognition is, how it can be used, what the purpose is for this as an enabling technology. And you should get a good overview over augmented humans and have some ideas for either augmenting an individual or also augmenting a group of people. So some of you with more computer science background will also get additional information about the sensing and some of the data analysis. However, I won't go into much detail, and I recommend you to then check for the individual publications. They are all linked and also mentioned on the slides, so it should be easy for you to find the corresponding paper or the corresponding publication that goes into detail. Of course, I'm also available by email and offline for any questions, remarks, or also feedback. Okay, so first a quick background about myself. As I mentioned, I work at the Graduate School of Media Design. However, my background is in computer science. I worked in wearable computing for all of my academic career. And especially I care about technology close to the body and wearable. So here you see a younger version of myself in the middle wearing a belt-integrated computer. That's the Cubic from ETH, and a head-mounted display as well as a one-handed keyboard to kind of input information and so on. If you're wondering about the belt-integrated computer, that was around 2000s, and we didn't have cell phones yet, so we wondered where would you wear a computer, and kind of the belt was one idea. It kind of happened differently, so now everybody of you has a smartphone, but kind of these are alternative ideas that worked at some point in time, and there are reasons why they didn't succeed. Also kind of Google Glass, that's my grandfather wearing Google Glass and trying it out during work. That also didn't really happen, but I still think we can learn something from those old approaches. And then since a couple of years, since around 5 or 6, maybe a bit longer, 7 years, I also care about what is going on in your mind, and I have some expertise in using eye trackers and also other types of brain sensing technologies. More to that later on during the lecture. But now, first, let's look into these ideas of ubiquitous, pervasive, and wearable computing. Some other researchers might disagree, but I think that for me, ubiquitous, pervasive, and also wearable are more or less interlinked. They are the same or very similar concepts with a slightly different focus. And I'll get to that. So early on in my research career, I soon realized that, if we are surrounded by computing, and that's, the idea of ubicomp, of pervasive, of wearable, they might focus a little bit more, on the environment. Pervasive and ubicomp and wearable is really, really close to the body or closer to the body. And still this idea that computing surrounds you and is close to you. Then if you think about it, the limiting factor, the bottlenecks, are no longer CPU speed, RAM, hard disk space, GPU, or other types of characteristics of the computing. It becomes more and more human attention. Human attention is then the bottleneck. I mean, imagine you wake up in the morning and you have to configure 40, 60, 70 different devices. I mean, you just, even if they have the slickest, the nicest, the most intuitive interface, that will take too long for you. I realized this early on. You see two of my desks, one at Palo Alto Research Center, one at the University Passau. And I realized, yes, if there are a lot of computing devices around, we have to find different ways, more intuitive ways to cooperate with computing. And here, for all of the three, ubicomp, percomp, and wearables, one of the core technologies is activity recognition and context-aware systems. Well, what does this mean? So you're not controlling the whole computing, all of the computers with a direct interface anymore, but computing becomes proactive. It understands what the user is doing in the environment. It has sensors to recognize what the user is doing. And using these information sources, it then adopts, it changes, and helps the user succeed with what they want to do. So it's a proactive system, a combination of sensors, signal processing, applied machine learning that supports a user in everyday situations. So let's take an example to see how this could work. This is some old work that we did together with IEICE on a maintenance scenario for a worker to repair a machine. Here the idea is you're tracking the worker's movements, you're analyzing, you're recognizing the activities, so the computing is recognizing what the worker is doing at the machine, and then provides just-in-time, in-situ feedback. He's a trained professional, but might work at a machine that he doesn't know or it's too old, and then the computing can help the worker to figure out what to do next and also prevent mistakes. Let me play the video. So here you see the worker, and then a cabling error happens. And he gets feedback, read that something is wrong, there's a cabling error. And as soon as he fixes this error, vanishes from the display, and he can continue on with the work. So the idea here is you have physical activity recognition to understand the actions, the tasks the person is doing on the machine, and then you provide just-in-time feedback to understand and recognize this and help the user cope with the current situation at hand. Now, when we started working in activity recognition, we used the setups you see on the left side. We sometimes jokingly called them Christmas tree setups, because yes, we had some intuition for what might work and what might not work, but overall, usually we used just too many sensors. We just tried to use as much sensors as we could. So, sometimes it took up to half an hour or 45 minutes to wire somebody up with that sensing equipment. And then, you did recordings, and we tried to figure out, can we recognize maybe those maintenance tasks, or can we recognize cooking activities or other types of activities that we were interested in. However, what we see now is that this type of activity recognition becomes mainstream. I think most of you have a smartphone that can track your progress in running a marathon, or going jogging. You use GPS, you use accelerations, they can do step counting, they can do all of the fancy activity recognition, and even better than what we had in the past, because actually the sensors that you have in your devices are much better than what we used 10 or 20 years back. And then, however, there comes also this time where I feel, okay, for me as a researcher, this becomes mainstream. This is now something that companies can do, and companies and developers can use in real applications. So then for me as a researcher, I wonder, what is next? What can I, explore more that is maybe a little bit more interesting? And here the cognitive activities or cognitive states come in. So if you're thinking about it, there are a lot of neuroscience and cognitive science researchers that work with excellent technical equipment. Here you see an FNIRS, a near-infrared spectroscopy, that gives you detailed information about cognitive load in your brain. There's EEG and FNIR and fMRI that gives you also detailed information about electrical potential of the brain, or also magnetic imaging. So the problem, however, with these technologies is they are quite obtrusive, and if you're talking about interactions, especially interpersonal or social interactions, it's really hindersome and cumbersome to wear those, and they would also influence, of course, what you can do. In this case, it's quite hard to move, and it's hurting also quite a bit if you wear that for a longer period of time. So although they give you really good ground truth and a lot of information, detailed information, they might not be what you want to use for everyday detection and recognition of cognitive states. So what can you do? And moving a little bit away from the brain, the first sensing modality that we explored for tracking cognitive tasks was eye tracking. And eye tracking is interesting because it's kind of a window to your brain, but then also it can be not so difficult. It's not so difficult to record it. You see here an SMI eye tracker. It's still a little bit obtrusive, but nicer than the last picture, of course. And it uses optical eye tracking, so it uses two infrared cameras that face the eye, and also light sources, infrared light sources. They track the pupil. You see this in the small pictures up in the corner. And then you have a scene camera. You have to calibrate the scene camera and the two eye cameras. And what you get out then is fixations and saccades. So the points where your eye is relatively still, where it's focusing on one point, and also saccades, so fast eye movements. And so with that, you know where somebody is looking in their field of view. We use this to explore a particular cognitive task, and that was reading. Why we tried reading was because, cognitive states are quite difficult to explore. Sometimes, you have to ask the user, and then you cannot really be sure that their subjective experience is really what they can describe in words later on. And at least with reading, we don't have this problem. We get back to this problem again and again. So this is something that we have to tackle with and deal with, especially exploring affect or exploring emotion. However, for reading, you can see if somebody is reading. You have the eye movement left and right, and you can also assess if they were reading the text over maybe a comprehension questionnaire, or just asking them about what they were reading, what they were experiencing. And so we started with reading using eye tracking. And what we could do is we could detect if somebody is reading or not, just based on the eye movement, and also how much somebody is reading. Kind of an analog to a pedometer, a step counter. It's a wordometer, a word counter of reading. And then also what kind of documents a person was reading. So textbook versus manga as an example, because the layout and so on is quite different for both, and you can just detect based on the eye movement of a person which type of document they are reading. So this was work on that front. And although there was an improvement in terms of sensing technology to the brain sensing, we were still not so happy about the eye tracker. I mean, it's still obtrusive, and there is related work also that shows that an eye tracker or also a camera that you're wearing on your face really changes how people interact with you. So we wondered, can we build cognitive activity tracking systems that are suitable for everyday life and even less obtrusive, not that big, but also maybe a longer battery life. These eye trackers now have a battery life of about 3 to 4 hours. I think the current newer versions might be a little bit longer, 4 or 5 hours, and they look also nicer, especially the new Pupil Labs eye trackers are super nice, and they look similar to glasses. You still have to have a smartphone or some kind of battery pack with you, and also the smartphone or the recording device usually gets a little bit hot, but overall, we're getting there. Still, it's a little bit obtrusive. We did work with Google Glass and also with some phones and tablets. But there's this problem of long-term tracking. There's also this problem depending on the social context. Google Glass was also not so accepted, and is still a little bit socially not socially acceptable sometimes. So we were happy that we could work with Jeans on Jeans Meme. And use those glasses for cognitive activity recognition, because they look more like normal eyewear. They're relatively light. However, compared also to Google Glass, they are just a sensing device. So they connect over Bluetooth, low energy, and they have some sensors in them. So an accelerometer, so that measures the acceleration of your head. You can do step counting and other things with that. You can also get the head posture from it, and also a 3-axis gyroscope that measures angular velocity. So you get the head orientation or the angular velocity of the head with that. And then also 2-axis EOG, electrooculography. So what is EOG? These are the electrodes, 3 electrodes around the nose. And they can give you information about the eye movements to some extent. How does this work and why does this work? This is related to your eye being a dipole. It has a positive charge in front and it has a negative charge in the back. And then what happens is if you put usually two electrodes, one on top and one below the eye, you can get up and down movement because the eye, the positive charge of the front part of the eye moves up and down, and that changes the measurements that you get from the two electrodes. And the same holds also for left and right. You can put it here and here, and you can get the potential change from the eye moving. Electrodes move to the back to your visual cortex. So that's why, you have a negative charge in the back and a positive in the front. And now Jin's meme uses the left and right electrodes next to the nose to detect the horizontal movement, and also the top electrodes and the two bottom electrodes to detect a vertical movement. So I can try and show you a small demo. So these are the glasses. So you see the stream now coming in. So you see also there's a lot of noise when I put on the glasses. And now if I move, and again a little bit of noise, I have to put in the electrodes correctly. Now let's wait till it settles down. Blink, blink, and I can do left and right eye movement, left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right. You should see the violet signal going up and down. That's my left and right eye movement. And I can do also up and down. That's the blue. Blue doesn't work as well as the left and right. And you see, of course, also in terms of noise. So there's quite some noise as soon as I move the electrodes, of course. And then I have to wait again till it settles down. I can get a couple of quick eye blinks. And again, left and right. So you get some information about the eye movement. However, it's not like an eye tracker. It's not as stable. It's not as nice as an eye tracker. On the other hand, it's nicer in some sense because it looks like relatively normal eyeglasses, and also the battery runtime is over a day, so you can get 16 to 17 hours of battery runtime. So overall, that's, I think, kind of something that speaks for it. Now the question is, what can you do with this? You don't get an eye tracker, so you don't have a scene camera. You don't know where a person is looking. You get this noisy signal of left and right and up and down, and maybe you can also detect blinks. So what we did with it is we did a couple of cognitive fluctuation studies. So, imagine, depending on when you watch this video, if you watch this maybe in the morning, 2 hours or 3 hours after you woke up, that usually means this is your cognitive peak performance. If you had a regular 6 to 8 hours of night sleep, that's usually, the best time to get new information in. This is also the time of day when I usually try to do the most important work. And then, during the day, after lunch, you get slightly more fatigued and so on. And so you have your circadian rhythm, you have fatigue and alertness that changes throughout the day. And we can measure this and get an estimate for your fatigue and alertness also over these type of glasses and over your eye movement and head movement. So for this fatigue and alertness studies, we had 20 participants. They wore the glasses for 3 weeks and then at least 10 hours a day. We got the electrooculography and the motion data, and then every 2 hours we asked them to fill out a cognitive test, so some standard sleepiness scale, and also a psychomotor vigilance task. That's a reaction time test on a smartphone. And then over this, especially over this reaction test, we could correlate and find some correlation to the alertness level that we could detect over the eye movement, so over the blink and also over the left and right and up and down eye movements. So yes, so we can tell how fatigued or alert somebody is from these type of glasses. And we can also detect sleep onset with the same type of sensor. So in this case, we had a study about a sleeping assistant for naps in the afternoon using VR environments. So you could select your own VR environment. In this case, some beach or ocean, also some cabin in the woods, also your own bedroom in VR. And then we used the same sensor to detect sleep onset for naps. And here, the interesting part actually about this study was that for the own room in VR, so we asked people to record their own bedroom with a 360 camera. And for this, then actually they had the fastest sleep onset. So that was a bit surprising. So it seems there's something nice about sleeping in your own room. Not only are we using sensors and glasses from a company, but we are also building our own for this type of activity recognition. And this is now work from Masai Katsutoshi. He worked on affective wear. He built glasses that can recognize facial expressions. So you can get the facial expressions using this type of glass that uses photoreflective sensors. The nice part about those type of photoreflective sensors is they're relatively affordable. They measure the distance to the skin, so you get the measure between the skin and the glasses frame, and over that you can detect different facial expressions, so all 9 different facial expressions according to Paul Ekman. And how this works is, if you're smiling, for example, your cheek will go up, and this is a distance change in the sensing value. So you see the different sensing values. In this case, the first iteration had 8 sensors, and with those 8 sensors, we could detect 9 different facial expressions. Important here, these are facial expressions. This is not the emotion that is associated with the facial expression. So we can just detect what type of facial expression a person is doing, not how they internally are feeling. But, kind of as an idea, you can use this to figure out how much smiling versus frowning you do throughout the day, and also get some more detail and some more insights about your facial expressions in terms of interacting with other people. And the last bit that I want to introduce in the eyewear section, this is already work that goes towards interactions. And this is work from Ju-Young Lee. He's a researcher at Geist. And when he visited us for a research stay, he was also taking part in some of the studies that we did with Jin's meme. And what we realized when we saw his sensing data was there were some strange noise, there were some strange activities in his sensing data at the time, and we didn't really know why that happened, but it seemed systematic. So what he did was he recorded himself and checked why certain sensor signal or so on would happen. And so he recorded a video, and we realized he was just touching his nose quite often, and that gave an error or that gave some noise in the EOG data from the Jin's meme. And then we wondered, okay, can we maybe also use that to detect a couple of gestures? And this is then the work. So you might think, oh yeah, it's kind of funny, and I agree with you. And first we thought also, oh, this is just a kind of a funny video or funny idea. However, I came to think a little bit differently about it when Jo-Young gave the presentation at UPComp East Week in 2017. And in that case, he actually used the system to change his slides, so you could do forward, backward, and so on using these interactions. And at the end of the presentation, he got also this question about, yeah, this is nice, interesting signal processing work, interesting design and interactions. However, this is not practical. I mean, who would use that? And the nice thing is he could then answer this question with saying, oh, didn't you realize I was actually using the system while presenting? And then he asked the people in the room, there were around 60 to 70 researchers, about if they recognized that he was using the system to advance his slides. So, kind of slide forward, slide backward. And just about half of the people, after a 25-minute presentation about nose interactions, just realized that he was using the system. So I felt there is something interesting in facial interactions and interactions in the face in terms of socially acceptable interactions. Because if you think about it, it's much more acceptable to touch your face. Maybe not now anymore because of the pandemic, but still we touch our face usually 3 to 5 times a minute. Then, maybe looking at a smartwatch or interacting with a smartwatch, because that's kind of associated with, oh, I hope Kai is soon finished with his lecture because I'm getting bored or so on. Even though, you might just check a notification or something else that was coming in. So in that case, maybe, kind of nose interactions or face interactions are still an interesting interaction space. And this was now the first system where you saw a feedback system, where you had, kind of a full interactive loop, where we didn't just recognize a specific physical or cognitive activity like facial expressions, but where, kind of you could actually control something with something that is as obtrusive or unobtrusive as a nose rub. And that was then also, this is the prelude to this idea of augmenting humans. So what do I mean when I talk about augmenting humans? And how is the relationship to human-computer interaction? So if you're thinking about it, so human-computer interaction traditionally focused on, punch cards first, and then desktops with mouse, keyboard, and other types of interaction, and really focusing just on this thin skim, this thin layer between users and computing that can be defined, on a screen or similar as a user interface. And Ubicom, PACCOM, and wearables took that to the real life, where we might not have screens, where we might not have a mouse or a keyboard to interact with systems. So then, kind of if you're thinking about mobile computing, you still have a user, and the user has devices, your smartphone, tablet, your laptop, your desktop, and kind of there's still this distinction, this separation between the user and the device. And kind of you see that also, that interacting with the smartphone is still quite cumbersome. You see people staring down, you see people that might run into somebody, that they are distracted. So it's not natural and it's not integrated. With wearables, we are moving towards a situation where the device is really on the body. We're starting with the smartwatches. I don't like them too much, but it's, I think, a first example of a wearable. It's still a bit obtrusive. There are some people that really cannot wear it due to the work they're doing. Our example of the maintenance workers at the beginning is one of those categories. And however, it's already on the body, and it can measure also your heart rate and other physiological signals. So it's closer to you. And maybe a nicer example would be then really glasses, computational glasses that you're wearing, or also sensors or other wearables that are equipped or that are integrated in garments, in textiles, in your clothes. So then you're wearing it, and it is part of the body, but also there's still the separation between the user and the device. You can still take it off. And then what Augmented Humans, however, is really about is some more integrated approach between devices and users. What do I mean by that? It's not implantable. That's also interesting, but I'm not a medical researcher, not doing a medical science. I'm a computer scientist. And what I mean with integrated is there's some overlap with the user in terms of their senses. So the device becomes somehow integrated with the perception of the user. And you might again wonder, that sounds interesting, but how? What do you really mean with integrating a device with our senses. One analog example again is if you're using a tool and you become an expert in using that tool, it feels as if it's part of your body. You're not thinking for a pen about you're moving the pen, but you're thinking about writing something. You're writing your name, and it's ingrained in you. The tool becomes integrated with you. The same holds if you're riding a bicycle or if you're driving a car for a long time. For parking, parallel parking, after a while, you don't need to look that much anymore. You have an intrinsic feeling how big the car is around you. You know that because over time, the car has become a part of your externalized body schema. So these are things that are more or less integrated. Glasses, analog glasses, are also a good example. You put them on in the morning, they enhance your vision. And after maybe a couple of minutes or so on, you actually forget that you put it on. Contact lenses are similar, and they fulfill a purpose. And they're kind of very integrated or partly integrated with your body because you're not seeing them directly as a tool all the time. Clothes is also maybe already also towards that end. So now we talked a bit about analog examples for this integration idea, for this augmentation idea. Can we come up with a couple of digital or partly digital and electronic examples? And let me share a little bit my journey in how I got interested in augmenting humans and kind of also what it means for me in terms of vision and direction. So we worked with Yamen and Tomoya on meta-arms. What you see on the illustration is two robot arms that you wear on a backpack and two trackers on your feet, so you can just use the arms while sitting. And the two trackers, they transmit the movement of your feet to the two additional arms. So that means if you're moving your left leg, the left arm is moving. And if you're moving your right leg, the right arm is moving. And if you're moving your toes, you can actually also even grip something with these arms. And why is that interesting, or how does this relate to the augmented human and integration idea I had before? So initially, I was not too interested in the research, but I helped Yamen and Tomoya to set it up one time, and I was strapped in for maybe 20-25 minutes. I was moving my legs and the arms were moving, and it was an initial prototype. And then suddenly, maybe so after 10 minutes or so on, I moved my legs, and it didn't feel like I'm moving my leg. It felt to me like I'm moving a third or a fourth hand. And that feeling was fascinating to me, because it meant, I could have a third or fourth hand. And so that's why we explored that. And I think that's a really good example on how plastic our brain is after a while to change this perception. And for me, that's a good example of augmenting humans. Can we give people a feeling for having another arm, or having a digital tool that extends your body schema, that extends your body to maybe a remote place or to other places. So here's now a small video about the system. Oops. So you can see this is a SIGGRAPH demo, so you can see a person holding a cup or a kind of giving themselves hands, and you see the foot tracking. We did also a little bit of task evaluation, so Fitts law, HCI evaluation on how quick people can do, and this is fascinating. So you have even people that can catch balls with the setup after a little bit of training. So yeah, so this means, kind of, could we create additional limbs? And then other work that we explore is also skill acquisition in augmented humans. How does this function or work? So this is a collaboration with Kurita Sensei from Hiroshima University on artificial muscles. So what you see here is a setup that lets you move the wrist of a person, a user. And what we tried with this is we wanted to use embodiment. We wanted to use embodiment principles to get people to hopefully learn faster percussions and two-handed drumming rhythms. So rhythms. And how this works is, instead of training the old-fashioned way, training with a score or training just with an audio file or so on, we play the rhythm on the muscles of the person. So then the hands actually move and show you how to play it. And what we saw is also that error rate is actually going down if novices train with this. So you're replaying something on somebody's body to train, to make them understand how this feels. So also then the system, the pneumatic actuator, kind of becomes part of the learning process. There's also just a blurred boundary between the activation, the skill acquisition that the user does, and the skill acquisition that is induced over these actuators. So this is on motion and skill acquisition using motion. Now moving over to perception and maybe programming perception. Here Jin, one of my PhD students, wanted to use the intrinsic attributes of our eye to help us deal in different circumstances. This work actually deals with motion sickness. So you might know that in VR, for example, if there are fast movements and rapid movements that are not related to our body, then often the peripheral vision is blocked out or shrink together. And he wondered, can he do the same thing but in real-life applications? And built these glasses that have PDLC that is either clear or opaque. And it's clear, so you can see through in a normal situation. However, if you experience motion sickness, so if you're in a car or in a train and you feel motion sick, you can activate the glasses and it will block your peripheral vision. So you're still able to read or do other things, but just the peripheral movement that you're experiencing is blocked out. And that helps with reducing motion sickness in real-world scenarios. So using then again these intrinsic attributes and something that you might not even realize that much, especially if you're concentrating on the reading, that suddenly your peripheral vision is slightly opaque, helps you to then get less motion sick. Moving on this concept and idea of programmable vision, we were also exploring if you can share the eye movement with another person. in that case, we would use an eye tracker, a Pupil Labs eye tracker, to record and stream the eye movement of one person to another person, and using then monochrome liquid crystal displays on top of the eyes, so see-through displays, to guide the other person's eye gaze by blocking out some of the peripheral vision and moving the eye according to the recorded gaze. In that case, of course, we don't know if we're really inducing the same eye gaze. We just hope that this works, and we still have to do evaluation. So this is an early work in this sector, but I think it's still fascinating and fun to look at. Here's a small video to give you an idea about the setup and the system itself. So you see the eye movements are mapped between the person on the left to the person on the right. So when you see the see-through, the small gaze point that is see-through is moving according to the other person's eye gaze. Now this is fun. However, maybe we should go to a more serious application of the same setup. In this case, however, we are not sharing the eye gaze between one person and another person in real time, or trying to share, I should say, this, but we're simulating visual impairment. So we can use the same system, in this case an eye tracker, then on one person, and the liquid crystal displays to, for example, block central vision, or also block peripheral vision. So in that case, I have to say a small disclaimer. This work, we don't know what a person with visual impairment really experiences. And evaluating this is also tricky. I'll get to that in a bit. So you can use, of course, standardized tests that are used for a medical assessment of certain visual impairment situations, and then compare our system to those tests. And if the test results are similar to somebody who has this visual impairment, we can at least say that it simulates it to some extent. Yet this qualitative experience of somebody having a visual impairment is not something that we can capture with a system like that. However, what we can do with a system like that is, you can do accessibility walkthroughs. You can simulate a specific visual impairment and then check that, for example, a building is okay to walk through having a certain visual impairment. So can people still read the signs? Can they see where they're supposed to go if, kind of part of your central vision is blocked, part of your peripheral vision is blocked? So for that, it's actually useful. So here's the system setup, a small video. So you see first the real-time eye tracking with the Pupil Labs eye tracker, and then the simulation of the LCD, that is the central vision block, so making it harder to read in the central vision, and the peripheral vision block, or peripheral vision loss simulation. So the setup is as follows. As I mentioned, we use a Pupil Core open source eye tracker, and that feeds into a PC that then controls the two LCD displays. And the nice thing about the LCD displays right now, we're working just with circles for the peripheral and central vision block, but we can show anything we want on the displays. So you could implement floaters, you can implement any type of vision impairment that is dynamic to the eye movement. And that's something I think that's quite novel and new. You could also do other things, kind of as you saw before, the sharing eye gaze was an example of some implementation. Here again is the implementation, so you can change the degree of the blocking in terms of peripheral vision and also central vision, or how much you want to block on the glasses. And then the question came up also before, kind of how realistic is this? And as I said, I don't know. I'm not visually impaired, and even to talking with somebody who is visually impaired, it is difficult to nearly impossible to capture their subjective experience again. What we can do to evaluate is just we have to rely on visual acuity and visual field tests. So these are kind of standard tests that are used by doctors, optical doctors, to assess your vision, and we use them then to analyze how well our system works. Kind of, can people really not read some of the letters on this visual acuity test scale, or can they not see some of the peripheral vision dots they're supposed to see in the visual field test? And then over that we can evaluate it to some extent. Here's again just a small video to give you an idea about the overall system again. So you see the central vision loss simulation, and a kind of a simulation on the right for that, and also the peripheral vision loss situation for the system. But again, here it's just a circle, but overall, because these are programmable LCDs, we could show whatever we want. These were now examples for an individual to augment their body extension with either arms, or to augment their visual perception. And now we are moving towards the collective, towards augmenting social context, a couple of people, in this case an audience, and dancers with physiological signals and with sensing and actuation. And in this case, we do a little bit of a detour. I'll explain a little bit how we started that work. And the initial inspiration came from discussions with Jamie Ward. He's a lecturer at Goldsmith, and he's very interested in what it means to be live, and what it means that we have something that is called interpersonal synchrony. And this happens, right now we are in a remote place, so I don't know you, I don't see you, I don't know if you can follow what I'm, talking about. But what happens if we would meet is, kind of we are talking, and then there are these parts, these sections where we would see some synchrony between, my head nod and your head nod, or my eye blinks and your eye blinks, and so on, and vice versa, depending on who's talking, depending on what topic we are discussing. And we wanted to explore that because we also had the wearable sensing, and there's quite some work in psychology that does this by just counting eye blinks, by counting head nods manually, or using cameras. And we wondered, can we also get the same kind of data but with the wearable setups, the everyday unobtrusive technology that we are using? And so we were using Jin's meme for some recordings where people did a face-to-face conversation, and also turning their backs to each other. and having similar conversations, we could see, of course, if you're sitting face to face, there's more interpersonal synchrony in the head nods using the glasses as sensors, and also in the eye blinks. So we use the accelerometer and also the EOG sensors that I explained before, the electrooculography sensor, to get the data, and we could find, yes, there is more synchrony if you're sitting face to face versus back to back. And it was kind of the start in exploring interpersonal synchrony. And actually Jamie did more on this. So he also worked with a theater in London, the Flute Theater, directed by Kelly Hunter, and they are organizing workshops also with children who are on the spectrum, on the autism spectrum. And in those workshops, actors will interact with the children, and in the end, the actors and the children play Shakespeare together. So it's fascinating. It's very engaging and exciting work. However, also in this case, Jamie worked in this case with motion sensors on the actors and on the children, and found here also some motion synchrony happening in certain parts of the play. And we got inspired by this and wanted to continue and move forward this work. And luckily at the time, a dancer from contemporary dance ensemble in Tokyo worked with us, Moe. And she wanted to use first actually also perception and motion, so Jin's meme or Pupil Labs related data to augment a dance performance. The idea was that the dancers could see where the audience is focusing on, what they're seeing. And we did a couple of tests, but it was just too difficult. We just didn't have enough eye trackers. They are, affordable for eye trackers, the Pupil Labs, but still expensive. So we had 3 or 4 eye trackers for some of the performances. But then some people felt left out because they didn't have sensing devices. We also had to deal with lighting changes that were difficult to compensate for. And then we tried Jin's meme and the eyewear, but there also were some issues because some people were wearing already glasses, and we also were not sure how to interpret the data that we recorded. We did a couple of test recordings, but then we moved on from this modality, from the eye movement and head movement, towards something that is more related to excitement and stress. And in that case, we used the sensors and the wristband that I showed already at the beginning. You're using electrodermal activity, EDA. It's also called galvanic skin response. So you put a small current between those 2 electrodes, and then you measure the skin conductivity, and if a person sweats and so on, this changes. So you get these peaks if somebody feels excited or stressed. And we also use the blood volume pulse, so a small sensor that gives you information about the heart and the heart rate. Why do we use physiological signals if we are then kind of interested in the stress and the excitement? So something about the effective measurement of the audience members, because there is a non-trivial, but still there is an overlap between physiological signals, so the BVP and the EDA that we're using. There's also ECG, electrocardiogram, and EEG, so brain sensing, that we didn't use, but kind of these type of signals can be used, and there is a relationship to, and a complex one, but still there is a relationship to some of the cognitive states that we are interested in. So engagement and relaxation are reflected often also in BVP and EDA data, also stress and sometimes cognitive load. So similar to what we did with the very noisy eye movements of the Jeans meme classes, we did the same thing to then try to interpret the physiological sensing to figure something out about the engagement of the audience. So we get what you could say some kind of a hint of the engagement, of the stress and excitement of the audience using these type of sensors. And we engineered our own wristband with George and Ding Ding. We're working on the hardware design. It uses an ESP32 chip, quite a nice mobile chip that also has Bluetooth and Wi-Fi. So the data is streamed over Wi-Fi also right now to anywhere we want. It has also some motion sensors in it that sample with 50 hertz. The heart rate samples with 200 hertz, so that means 200 measurements a second. And the electrodermal activity, so this EDA, this sweat sensor, samples with 4.5 hertz, so 4.5 measurements per second. And everything is streamed from the audiences to the dancers. And what we tried to create with this system was we really wanted to use the data of all of the audience members and then stream this data, so heart rate and heart rate variability. So heart rate variability is what happens between the peaks. So you have the bottom heart muscle moving, and what happens and the distance between the peaks, that's the variability. That's also an interesting measure also for the stress and excitement. We'll look into detail about one of those features later on in just a bit. And also the galvanic skin response or the electrodermal activity, the sweating, the peaks that give you also this stress and excitement. This data is streamed from all of the audience members to a server, and this server then controls the projections that you're seeing, the lighting, and also the sound and sound changes based on that sensor data. And that in turn, of course, influences again the dance, the performance, which influences back or reflects back to the audience members. And so we creating an emotional feedback loop. This work was published in TEI for the interaction parts, and also a larger journal paper at Tukai that goes into detail about the data that we recorded and also about the features and so on, and what we found in terms of linking this physiology to the choreography of the piece. Here's a short clip that gives you a little bit of an impression. I think that gave you a quick impression on the interactive part. But we don't only have this interactive part that is, also now using the streaming that you saw before. So this type of streaming here that is still going on. But we also have the sensor data recorded from all of the performances and from all of the members. Of course, all of the audience members gave their informed consent to be recorded. And what you see here now is some analysis of some of the heart rate features related to all of the performance audience members. So for each of the audience performance, we had around 40 to 45 people in the audience streaming their data. And on the bottom, you see the minutes, the time of the performance. So it was around 65 to 70 minutes per performance. And there are different parts: suits, card, puppet, Romeo, growth, and curtain. That was kind of the parts of the performance. And then the three performances, performance 1, 2, 3, and the two heart rate features. One is LF, HF. This is red, low frequency, high frequency ratio. This was actually what we used to control some of the animations, some of the visualizations and the sound. And also the PNN50. This is in blue. This is a heart rate variability feature. So this is what happens between the peaks of the heart rate. And especially this feature I want to discuss now with you, because PNN50, if you look into literature, is related to stress and relaxation. And so usually a PNN50 is low when a person is stressed or excited. And it gets higher when a person feels more relaxed. Looking now at the three performances, what we can see is that at the beginning of the performances, of all three performances, so from 0 to about halfway through the time, the PNN50 is rather low. And this correlates very nice with the choreography of the piece, because the dance performance is about finding your place in society, and at the beginning there's a struggle, there's something that wants to excite and stress the audience members a little bit. And then after half of the performance, you see that the PNN50 goes up. And this reflects the relaxation part. So this part, the person found their place in society, the dancers found their place in society, and the audience members should reflect back on the performance. Another thing that you can also see is that the error, so the blue margin around the blue line, is relatively low. Assuming you have 40 audience members per recording with a lot of different background, different ages from 18 to up to 60, and still there is some kind of synchrony, there's some kind of entrainment happening between audience members. I find that fascinating. I want to explore that more. So then the last bit that I want to share is also the EDA data. So this is now again the three performances, and you see in a dark gray or in gray are the EDA, so the peaks from the sweating on the palms. And especially the dark gray parts are interesting, because these are points where audience members mentioned these were memorable scenes after the performance. So we asked them what could they remember from the performance, what are the scenes that they liked, what are the scenes that they found memorable. And all of them have a lot of EDA peaks. So we can identify the memorable moments of the performance using the physiology of all audience members. And I think that's also a very interesting and cool insight. So this concludes the Boiling Mind, the dance performance. So for the last part of my lecture, I want to talk to you about a specific feeling, and that's frisson, the aesthetic chills that some people feel when listening to music. I also didn't know about the term frisson. It's French, and however, I knew the phenomenon. And commonly it's described as having goosebumps or feeling a shiver down your spine, and that is usually triggered from an external stimuli, such as music. And what made me find this topic fascinating was also that there's no definite answer why goosebumps, why this cold feeling down your neck actually happens. One explanation that I like is that frisson is often induced over music that establishes some kind of pattern. So you establish a type of pattern over the music. And then this pattern breaks. And what can happen then is, you feel surprised. You recognize the pattern, you thought the pattern would go on, and that might trigger a fight or fight response. Some fear, there's something happening. I'm not sure what it is. And that might then give you the goosebumps. And as soon as you realize that there's nothing bad, nothing dangerous happening, but it's actually something beautiful, the composer broke the pattern maybe in a very beautiful and a nice way, you feel this relaxation. And that creates then this aesthetic chill feeling. And we wondered, can we actually detect, induce, or also transmit this type of feeling using wearable sensors and actuators? Again, in situ, unobtrusively. This is part of work where we care about, what it is to be alive. So, as I mentioned before in the dance performance as well, we can transmit audio and video. I mean, you're listening now to my lecture, but I don't see you, and it's also in a different time or so on. So I cannot really react to you. I cannot figure out that, you liked this part maybe a little bit more, you found this interesting, or I skipped over some important explanation and maybe you feel lost in some other part. And this also happens, of course, on Zoom when we did this teaching in the pandemic. And we wonder a bit, can we transmit certain feelings? Can we transmit an atmosphere over a distance? And that's sometimes expressed also in Japanese when we talk about reading the air in a room. You walk maybe into a meeting, nobody talks, but you already feel a tense feeling, everybody is stressed. The same holds also maybe if everybody is happy or relaxed. You can feel that by just entering the room. And we wonder, can we understand that better using technology and then also transmit that over a distance? So this is the background for why we do this exploration in frisson. And then we first evaluated also if we can detect frisson. Quite quickly, I just wanted to glance over that. What we figured out is we can use the same sensing as we did for the Boiling Mind. Actually, related work also uses electrodermal activity, also uses heart rate related features. And there are some other ways to detect it, so respiratory rate with the lungs, and also piloerection, the hairs on the arm, but that doesn't hold for not everybody gets goosebumps, so we moved away from that, and we used actually our initial setup for the first experiments. We did some lab experiments where people then use a trigger to tell that they feel frisson. So this is maybe also a problem. We're using self-reporting. As I mentioned before, one of the tricky parts and the difficulty in understanding affect, understanding emotion, or any other cognitive activity or state is that we often cannot be sure about the subjective experience of a user. And they might not know that themselves sometime. We saw that with alertness and fatigue, some users didn't know how tired they were. And so we wonder, is that good enough? We hope now for frisson it's okay, but it's really a problem that we have to deal with in the field. We use the self-report trigger to tell people that they should tell us when frisson happened for them. And then we did also a couple of in the wild experiments where we had a concert with 18 audience members and 1 hour of music performance with piano pieces that are likely to induce frisson. Here's a small just quick video impression of the first recording. So all of the audience members were the sensors, and they're listening to the piano piece. And overall, I can say, the results for these works were too good to be true, so we're still looking into that a bit, but we got really high recognition rates for the frisson. We also published a data set. This is a Ubicomp IM Wood paper that is just out, a journal paper. So you can also look into the data, and we hope that other people will try to replicate that as well. In the latter part, we also try to induce frisson. In this case, so there's some related work that uses electrostatic activation to get your hairs going up, or also Peltier elements, cold feedback on the back. We went also with cold feedback and also some vibrotactile activators, but in the end we just decided to use the cold feedback. That was the best. So 2 thermal modules on the back of your neck to activate frisson. We evaluated this also in initial test with a couple of users to figure out if we can induce or increase the feelings and the amount of frisson that people are reporting. So this is statistically significant. So more instances of frisson were reported with thermal feedback than without thermal feedback. But it's also, again, tricky, how close is the frisson we are inducing to the frisson, to the aesthetic chills that somebody is feeling naturally. We don't know on the physiology side. So this is the EDA for, in blue, natural frisson that's occurring naturally for a person, and red for the neckband triggered frisson. And what you see, however, is that it seems similar, at least on the physiology level. Is it then the same experience? Again, we don't know, but at least this gives some indication that we might induce the feeling in other people. And then in the end, we also tried to transmit frisson, and this is even more speculative than the other works. We tried to share it in a musical concert because we have the detection, we have the induction, now combined it in one experience. In this case, if one person feels the frisson, it's transmitted to the people around them, hopefully stimulating them to also feel it. So this was the second concert that we did in this case with wristbands and neckband. So we had 25 people that just wore the wristband again for control group, and 25 people that wore the wristband and the neckband. So then this activation and stimulation happened. And here are some pictures from the experimental setup. So 50 plus wristbands, 25 plus neckbands. Here's some more pictures. We had also some LED feedback, so we could see the triggering of the frisson. We could also see that all of the neckbands were working okay. And then the idea was, kind of you have one person suddenly feeling frisson at a specific point in time, and then we share that with the people around, and then maybe the person next to them also feels it, and that triggers another frisson wave, and so on. So in terms of results, we cannot really say much about, can we really trigger frisson? But what we can say is that the group that had the neckbands had more frisson events than the other group. So again, it's a correlation. We have to do more tests, and I hope also maybe some of you will continue similar work to see then if we can really build these type of feedback loops and augment the present. So that brings me to the end of the lecture. Thanks to the group. I have a couple of thank you slides at the end for everybody involved. So this was the group for the second concert. Jan He was leading this, and everybody involved did really an amazing job. And now for the goals again, so to wrap this up, I tried to introduce to you this new and exciting field in human-computer interaction, the Augmented Humans research. And I motivated this from Ubicom, pervasive and wearable computing, from this enabling technology of activity recognition, and moving this activity recognition from physical to cognitive to some type of feedback loop and interactive systems. And then we looked into specific examples, one the sensor-driven eyewear, the other one the Boiling Mind dance performance, and then the last, the augmenting a specific feeling, specific emotion, the frisson that is more speculative, more recent, and still needs more time also to develop. And in the end, again, I wanted to thank everybody involved. So this was work of a large group of researchers, artists, and just creative, amazing, smart people. So this is for the Boiling Mind, and this is the thank you slide for the frisson wave. I hope I haven't forgotten, maybe I have forgotten a lot of people, so sorry for that, and thanks a lot for all of the amazing work, and I'm looking forward to do more things, and I hope you got a little bit excited about this field and might also continue a little bit of this work, or it might influence you in the future. Now some hints or some future further reading topics. So there's the SIGCHI, the HCI conference. There's also that has a lot of research that is also unrelated to augmented humans, but also some work that really works on this overlapping technology with our body. There's also the Augmented Humans conference, a smaller venue that really focuses on that, and it's Ubicomp. We will have 3 or a couple of more Boiling Mind performances just the beginning of this year. So this is 2023, so around March and April. I don't know when this video will be online, so I'm not sure if you can join that. And then last but not least, if there are questions, remarks, or ideas, or if you want to get some more information about some of the work that I presented, please reach out to me by email or also on Mastodon. So thanks a lot. I hope this 1.5 hours was interesting for you, and you had also a little bit of fun and understand now a little bit more about ubiquitous computing, wearable computing, and augmented humans. Thanks a lot, and goodbye.